Okay, so let's go through the long run effects of these policies. Go. Social Security, as we still mentioned, is with us still. Um, Huge program, $1 trillion, 5% GDP, 25% of all government spending or outlays are on Social Security, so more than defense. So this is a very, very large program, and it's only growing larger as the baby boomers age into it. And so this is from the Great Depression, so it has a huge effect. Um, and it's a massive expenditure. Farm subsidies. So while the Agricultural Adjustment Act is not still with us, we have this legacy of providing massive subsidies to farmers. And so this comes in direct subsidies with like 25 billion in direct subsidies to farmers, but there's also lots of protections to farmers in the form of like tariffs, where American farmers will get protection from foreign competition. And many countries have this. So the U.S. is not unique to this, as having these subsidies or propping up their domestic agricultural industry. And usually the rationale is like, in time of war, we need a stable food source, so we're kind of propping up our agricultural our agriculture in our country. But it is a massive distortion in terms of giving this money to farmers, and it goes to a really small part of the U.S. Essentially, it's going to 5% of congressional districts. And so it's going to these, it's like a major issue for the people representing these districts, these areas, and they can really wield their political influence to make sure that nothing happens to these subsidies that these regions of the country depend on. These are the primary beneficiaries: corn, wheat, cotton, rice, and essentially the idea is to provide stability to family farms, have them have a guaranteed income, with this kind of umbrella idea that we need a stable food source. Now, the reality of it is it has lots of different kind of negative consequences or unintended consequences. It's unhealthy. Essentially, the subsidy is tied to the type of crop, so you can't switch, say, to a more healthy crop like vegetables or fruits, and you'll lose their subsidy. Ironically, in California, where we grow mostly fruits and vegetables, there's not a lot of subsidies for them, for those growers in California. But the California growers are still in favor of the subsidies because it pushes down competition. Because if we didn't have the subsidies, people in the Midwest might switch to crops that are grown in California, and then there'd be more competition that these farmers in California would face. So even farmers who don't get the subsidies are often in favor of them. Okay, it's regressive in terms of these subsidies are going typically to the richest farmers. 15% of farmers receive 85% of the subsidies. It's going to really, really large scale farms, usually, not small scale farms. Many of these farmers are millionaires. I mean, many of these farmers, we think of the farmer as being kind of like, salt of the earth or something like that, but many of them are millionaires. And just a fun fact, the UK also has, the EU has a similar program providing subsidies to, although I don't know if this fun fact is still true after Brexit, but at least it was before Brexit, that the EU was giving $1.3 million to the Queen of England because she was technically a farmer, because there is farming done on her lands. So this is a regressive policy. I mean, most of this money is going to wealthy farmers. And internationally, these subsidies make it so American products are cheaper, and this will hurt farmers in developing countries. Essentially, American farmers in developing countries cannot compete with American farmers because the American farmers are getting this money from the government. Thereby, they can offer lower prices. They can undercut foreign competitors. So the people really hurt by this are farmers in other countries. Okay, so the HOLC, the legacy of the HOLC is that the government steps in and takes over all these mortgages. It takes over all these mortgages that people would have not been able to pay back. They take over these mortgages. Now, as we mentioned last lecture, mortgages were typically 5 years in length. The government says, well, let's extend these. Well, let's make them 20, 30 years in length. And we'll make them amortized, which means that at the end of the 20, 30 years, you're paying us monthly, it'll be paid off. And so HOLC does this. And then actually this gets codified with the GI Bill, that essentially this type of mortgage is now offered to veterans after World War II. What happens is that the government makes a ton of money on this, that people are able to pay back their mortgages with interest. And so this is a big moneymaker for the government. Private industry, banks take notes and say, hey, you know how the government did loans, how they did home loans with really long terms, 30 years, amortized, so it gets paid off, instead of how we're doing it, which is 5-year loans where people still owe a ton at the end. Those loans seem to be working better and the government's making money. Maybe we should do that. And so essentially the private market mimics the government and does loans like this. And so it completely transformed the mortgage industry. It went from, these short-term loans to these long-term loans where you didn't have to have as large of a down payment. So it transforms the mortgage industry and then therefore transforms home ownership in the US. So home ownership jumps up after we have this revolution in mortgages. Now, there is this weird unintended consequence where this home ownership, or sorry, there's this thing called the mortgage interest deduction, which I know sounds really boring. I know all those words together are super boring, but it's very important. Okay. And so what happens is you are allowed to deduct the interest you pay on your mortgage from your taxes. This was never intended to be like this, but it's essentially a consequence of the way the income tax law was written when it was enacted in the early 20th century, okay? And basically, some tax lawyers noticed that, hey, there's this thing where you can deduct interest in this for, I think it's interest above like 6,000 or something like that, which didn't really apply to many home loans until home prices came up. But essentially, some tax lawyers figured out, hey, we can deduct this mortgage interest. They figured out, people start doing it. People start deducting their interest, their mortgage interest. And once you give something to people, it's hard to take away. So once people figured it out and they got used to deducting their mortgage, their interest on the mortgage, this kind of became the way, or became the law of the land, that people deduct their mortgage interest. And so this is a massive tax break to people who own homes. If you own a home, this is like a massive tax break. In fact, when I do my taxes every year, my tax guy yells at me because he's like, you should buy a house because, like you could be saving money on taxes if you bought a house. And I'm like, I live in LA, like I don't make any money. How am I supposed to buy a house, dog? But this is what's called a regressive tax, where essentially it benefits upper income to middle to upper income people at the expense of lower income people, because lower income people typically are renters. They don't get any tax breaks for renting. If you own a house, you get a tax break. So this is kind of like this is a very hidden regressive tax that most people don't know about, and no economist would recommend. Every economist you would talk to says we should get rid of this. This is a terrible distortion. It's a tax break for that favors the upper income people at the expense of renters. But it was kind of grandfathered in, and like I said, it was like a loophole that was grandfathered in. And good luck trying to get elected, telling people who own homes that you're going to increase their taxes. We also have this unintended consequence that as home ownership increases, that the home becomes a source of wealth for many families. Like, this is the primary source of wealth for Americans, that they hold their wealth in the form of their home. And so we can trace all this to the mortgage reforms that happened in the Great Depression. Okay. These work progress organizations, now they did not become long-term in terms of their implementation, but as I mentioned earlier, they were very successful in stimulating the economy. Work by Price Fishback, if you're interested, has shown that there was a multiplier effect of these programs. And many works of art that you can that you can see, in many towns, can trace their origin to the WPA. The FDIC, as I mentioned in last lecture, is still with us. Up to 250,000 is insured, and this is a massive advantage to banks, which we call a moral hazard problem in economics. That essentially it's an implicit subsidy that they can be as risky as they want because their depositors are insured by the government. Unemployment insurance is still with us to this day. It's funded by the payroll tax. So payroll tax is about, it's 15.3%, I believe, and it's taken out of your paycheck. You may not even notice. And this essentially funds unemployment insurance so people who lose their job through no fault of their own. So if you are fired or if you're laid off, you can get unemployment. If you quit, though, you can't get it. So if you're ever in the situation where your boss is firing you and you say, you can't fire me, I quit, don't do that. Don't do that, because then you can't get unemployment insurance. It happened to my good friend John. Didn't get his unemployment insurance because he technically quit when he was getting fired. So just get fired. It's not a big deal. We've all been fired. All right. Have we? I don't know. Have I been fired? I can try. I've left several jobs, but I don't know if I've technically been fired. I quit before I would have got fired, like my buddy John. Anyways, but this unemployment insurance is the idea is it's a social safety net. It's so when you lose your job, you can at least be secure in that you're going to get some money that should help tide you over until you find a new job. And so you won't lose your, I mean, this happened to my brother-in-law. He lost his job, get the unemployment insurance. They were able to make the mortgage for the months while he was looking for a new job. So it's designed to cushion the blow. Usually losing your job is catastrophic, economically, but psychologically too. And so this is designed to give some reassurance to people, like, okay, at least I get the unemployment for a little bit, and hopefully I can find a new job in that time, and hopefully maybe make some investments. If I'm in a industry that's dying, maybe I can invest in new skills. I knew a bunch of people that were laid off at Fox Sports. Generally journalism is dying. A lot of these people took the time to say, hey, this industry is going away. I'm going to learn a new skill. I'm going to learn how to edit. I'm going to go be a movie editor. I'm going to learn special effects. I'm going to go work in, special effects industry, or I'm going to learn accounting, go become an accountant. So the idea is that hopefully that insurance provides enough of a cushion that if you want to get retrained, you can get retrained. Or if you want to move, you have the time to move to a new city where jobs may be. Okay. All right. Let's stop there.